This story got way juicier than I thought it would be. I knew there was a bit of a scandal, but I didn't know how big of a scandal there was. We're going to talk about MQA. This story has everything. Promises, lies, maybe, propaganda. And to me, the biggest surprise of all is who was financing this whole thing. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, maybe sign up for the Cam Coffee Club where you get this free Cam Coffee Club mug. And let's talk about the crazy MQA music scandal. Pretty straightforward video. We're going to talk about what MQA is, why it became such a big deal, when the cracks started to appear in the facade, when the whole thing fell apart, who was propping the whole thing up for so long, what their real goal was, and it wasn't to make things sound better. Bit of a disclaimer here. Most of the stuff in here is factual, but I will be giving my opinion, which is just that, my opinion. And I'm just a simple ex-Navy farm boy from Nebraska that learned how to turn on a camera and talk into it. So I'm no expert, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist or an audio engineer to kind of put the pieces together. Well, it was started by Bob Stewart. He was an engineer and co-founder of Meridian Audio, which was an actual audio company. He made the Meridian MCD in 1985, and basically it was a Philips CD player, but they went in and hot rodded the thing with better analog output stage, better power supply, I don't know. Anyway, they took a Philips CD player and they made it good, and they charged $1,500 for it in 1985, which I thought it was going to be way more expensive, but it turns out it wasn't. Bob has degrees in both engineering and psychoacoustics, which is how your brain kind of translates sound. The takeaway there is that Bob knew how to manipulate a digital signal, but more importantly, your perception of it. Perception, remember that. That's going to come back later. Everybody agreed that the Meridian CD player sounded way better than the other CD players of the time. They sounded pretty bad. Also sounded better because of jitter control. Remember that, too. Meridian had a very good reputation and actually made car stereos for Jaguar and Land Rover. Has anybody seen the new Jaguar coming out? Put it in the comments if you're gonna sign up, get in line to buy that thing. I think technically Meridian's still around, but in 2015, Bob went and basically chased this MQA dragon full time. MQA was announced at CES in 2015, and Master Quality Authenticated was released to the public. The promise? Master Studio sound in a file that you can stream. And Stewart called it a revolutionary end-to-end system. Remember that too. Delivering time accurate, de-blurred, studio approved sound. All this is coming back. And there's a little light on your DAC, your digital to analog converter. And if it showed up, that means, well, if it tingles, it means it's working. If the light lights up, it means it's working. And if it was working, that meant you just weren't listening. You were listening how the artist intended it. But that light also meant something else. It meant money. Licensing fees to MQA that ultimately we paid for. Everybody lined up to get something that had MQA on it. And in 2017, Tidal basically used MQA to differentiate themselves from all of the other streaming platforms. It was such a big deal and crammed down our throats so much that at one point I thought Tidal owned MQA. I thought they were the same. Nope. Just turned out Tidal was paying MQA a whole bunch of money. And as soon as the budget DACs could get the MQA sticker on there, then they could basically say, look, you can get MQA, but it's affordable. Everybody had to pay MQA a license fee, including the chip manufacturers and the DAC makers themselves. Software companies, firmware companies. Roon reminds me of Sony, Philips, and the CD. Basically anybody that was making CDs, making a CD player, all had to pay Sony and Philips a little bit of. However, despite accepting checks and payments from everybody, MQA never turned a profit. I almost said Tidal because I still in my head think Tidal and MQA are the same thing. MQA never turned a profit. Quite the contrary. At best, in 2021, according to my research, they made $900,000. In revenue, that's not profit. In revenue, they lost over $5 million. In administration costs, whatever that means. MQA was flying high in 2021. It seemed like it was becoming synonymous with high quality audio. Until YouTuber Golden Sound. What did he do? I don't know, because it's too complicated. Basically, he recorded some stuff in MQA, uploaded it to Tidal, and then did some nerd audio stuff and discovered that there was noise and there was distortion. So he made a video about it. And what happened next was kind of the worst thing that MQA could do. The allegations that Tidal wasn't bit perfect. And here's where it gets very complicated. MQA said, well, MQA files are delivered losslessly and reconstruct exactly the sound that an artist, studio, or label approves. And when you say that out loud, it kind of sounds like talking points or propaganda or a lawyer telling you what to say. They also kind of redefined what lossless meant. It didn't mean bit for bit data fidelity. They tried to change the conversation to end-to-end data authenticity. Quote, MQA has never made false claims about losslessness. It includes the whole chain. So basically, it's not lossless, but it is lossless holistically if it's end-to-end authenticated. They criticized Golden Sound's impulse and sine wave tests as not musical and not representative of human hearing. And some of my favorite ambiguous jargon is de-blurred, authenticated, end-to-end. Optimized for human listeners. I don't think this finely refined response from MQA probably had the impact that they thought it was going to have. Because, think about it. Nothing instills confidence in a bunch of pedantic audiophiles, like an exercise in arguments and circular semantics and ambiguous jargon. We love that type of stuff. I mean, come on! How many engineers are audiophiles? There's no way that they honestly thought nobody was going to ask any more questions. Oh, also, the files got removed from Tidal. They said, they, as in being MQA, they said that we had nothing to do with that. We're not Tidal. So, wrap this all up in a nice little bow. Their response basically was the equivalent of, hey, trust us, bro. We know what you like. Rondo's what plants... What is that? Rondo's what plants crave?
But Rondo's got what plants crave.
MQA is what audiophiles crave. So, this is what MQA claimed. Pretend like this is a studio master and it's all its perfection that's been approved by the artist. It's wonderful, but it's just way too big to get it from point A to point B. Trying to put this big thing through something like a pinhole. So what they do, what they claim they did, fold it up real nice, tight, send it through the hole, and then on the other end, there would be a device or some software that would start to unfold it. And then on the other side, you would have the same file, the same perfect, beautiful, artist-approved file. Revelatory, but there are problems. There are hiccups in the software, glitches in the matrix. And one of the things I noticed, because I've been doing this channel, is that everybody had a DAC that was MQA. And then they didn't. So Topping, SMSL, all of a sudden started to release DACs that didn't include MQA, which were lower priced, which makes sense because, well, they're not paying the MQA licensing fees. And I kind of got a kick out of it because I felt like MQA was being shoved down our throat. The cat was kind of out of the bag. Number one, Tidal was not indeed bit perfect. It did indeed change the files that were uploaded. Two, it wasn't a great user experience. Three, well, the Chinese DAC companies weren't going to pay for MQA. And audiophiles on message boards are worse than a sewing circle. The news soon spread like wildfire. And the outrage ensued. So you got a bunch of angry audiophiles, a bunch of people that don't want to pay extra for MQA. And then Tidal, you know, their biggest customer, I think, in 2023 said, I think we're going to move away from MQA. Why? Well, because of FLAC. What does FLAC stand for? Free, lossless, audio codec. Even I could figure that one out. Not master's quality authenticated. Keyword free. So why did Tidal move towards FLAC? Well, it was free. And the audio nerds that really care about this stuff, well, they were mad. And I don't blame them. I was mad too. Not because of how MQA sounded, but because of their heavy-handed marketing. This is the part of the MQA story that gets real interesting because I had no idea about this. They were bankrolled by a place called Renet. Who are they? Well, they were a spin-off of Richemont that owns Mont Blanc, IWC, and Cartier watches and expensive pens. Why would a company that was spun off from a luxury brand that sold watches and pens, why would they be interested in MQA? Well, here's the beauty of it. MQA just wasn't a codec like FLAC. MQA wanted to be the Dolby of high-res music streaming. Here's where it was a little bit different. And if you know anything about movies, when they mix for the tracks, they mix for Dolby. So MQA wanted things to be mixed for MQA in the studio. They wanted the streaming platforms to use it. They wanted the software programs to use it. They wanted the hardware to use it. They wanted the DAC chips to use it. Every link in the chain from recording or mastering all the way to playback. And, well, MQA was dealing in authentication and decryption, which is another form of DRM, or digital rights management. MQA wanted total domination of the entirety of the chain, just like Sony. Sony co-created the CD with Philips and almost immediately wanted to destroy the CD because, well, it had no DRM, so people could rip it. So they created the mini disc and the DAT. DAT was for recording. Mini disc was for playback. Sony would own all of it. So if anybody wanted to play in that sandbox, well, they had to pay Sony. It backfired spectacularly on Sony, though, and when that failed, well, they installed rootkits and malware on your computer, which I did another video on. The point is, there's never been a really good track record if somebody tries to control everything. So just to drive this home, MQA 2021 made 900 grand, basically. Lost 5.3 million. And they were being bankrolled by a spinoff from a luxury conglomerate. Why? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's the big surprise. Again, this is pure speculation on my part, so take it with a grain of salt. Let's talk about FLAC, free lossless audio codec. You can download it, you can encode with it, you can stream with it. So how do you make money off of anything that's free? By volume. Actually, do you remember there was an SNL skit, I think it was in the 80s, where it was about a bank. You know how they do the fake commercials? And the bank they just made change. If you give us a dollar bill, we can give you 10 dimes or 20 nickels or 5 dimes and 10 nickels, whatever you want. And then somebody asked, well, how do you make money? And he said, simple, volume. Anyway, FLAC's not going to make any money on volume. But I think MQA was savvy enough to know that they needed to convince a lot of people that MQA was better than FLAC. They said it was lossless. You're going to hear what the artist intended, which in and of itself is a completely false statement. Some artists probably don't even approve their masters. Some artists approve it over a Zoom call. Some artists want it to sound good in a car, or more appropriately, Bluetooth headphones, earbuds. The whole how the artist intended it was, well, a fallacy. It was vaporware. It was a red herring. They were creating a narrative around MQA that this was the audiophile golden ring. If you wanted to hear all of the music, then you had to use this, MQA. And if you want to be Dolby, you better make sure that you have a very good marketing department. More importantly, a propaganda machine. Because your business model only works if everyone adopts it. Chip makers, DAC makers, Tidal, Rune, and I'm sure they were bugging other streamers to adopt their MQA nonsense. So think about what MQA had to do. They had to convince the entire industry, which means labels, the press, engineers, artists. Then they had to convince the hardware makers. And then, well, they had to convince us. Then they needed to file and defend patents. And then they had to maintain a global support team. Because what they were really doing is reinventing the wheel. But they convinced everybody that it was better than the wheel. And to keep that machine running, they needed a lot of people. So I don't think they had any concern about what the music sounded like. I think their concern was telling you what the music sounded like. And that if you really want to enjoy your music, well, then it needs to be encoded in MQA and played back on an MQA piece of hardware with MQA compatible software. If you're mounting a propaganda campaign of this size, well, it's going to take a lot of people. Eventually, when you look at everything that's laid out in front of you, you just have to call a spade a spade. Maybe they started off with good intentions. Maybe Bob Stewart believed in what he was doing. However, let's go back to the beginning and see what Bob had to say about MQA. He's a psychoacoustic engineer, which means he's good at perception. Richemont is great at assigning value to common things, like a pen or a watch, and convincing people that it's better than something else. Bob was also good at jitter control. Remember that first CD player he made? That was one of his differentiating factors in what made his CD player better than the stock Philips CD player. The buzzword de-blurring, well, that's kind of like jitter. Bob also mentioned a revolutionary end-to-end system. Well, that kind of sounds like, well, stuff has to be mastered in MQA. Hardware companies need to use MQA. The chip companies need to use MQA. The software companies need to use MQA. End to end. And since it is end to end, well, that means they fundamentally control everything. He also keyed in on how the artist intended it, or how the label intended it, or how the studio intended it. Well, he didn't tell us which studio. And the bottom line is, well, it was his studio. It was the MQA studio that fundamentally decided what the artist intended. So that's kind of convenient, right? And if something wasn't mastered in MQA, well, guess what? For a nominal fee, you can send in that album and have them, MQA, make it MQA. So not only would they control all new music that's being distributed across digital platforms, but all of the legacy music that wasn't encoded in MQA. That's kind of sobering to think about, because the narrative that was presented to us was that, well, this was going to be better music. But what was going on behind the scenes was a Sony-esque draconian takeover of the entirety of music, from recording to playback. And at some point, it ceased being about the technology, and the innovation was really the linguistic propaganda. Because let's think about this. It's basically just renaming stuff that already existed and then slapping a sticker on it, charging a license for it, all while having luxury billionaires on your board. The craziest thing is that MQA's plan almost worked. Through semantic gymnastics, MQA almost convinced the entire industry, including us, that they had created a better mousetrap. And they did that by teaming up with a company that has ties to a luxury brand that makes their living building empires by assigning differentiation and value to things like pens or watches or audio codecs. A YouTuber called BS, MQA's response was filled with hubris, tone deafness, sounded like it was written by lawyers, and the whole thing fell apart. In my opinion, this thing was never about sound. It was about control and having a music monopoly. It was really about convincing you that the garbage man is a refuse engineer. At the end of the day, a $10 Casio tells better time than a $10,000 Cartier. And in a nutshell, that's the story of MQA that actually wanted to be Cartier.